a lot of talk in the defense closing and opening about things they learned in law school or going to law school. And I think in the opening I heard at one point, being on a jury is different than being a person. I don't know if any of that's true, but I'm done with law school and I do this for a living. I operate in a world of common sense and not fanciful thoughts of just this guy finding his dead parents and deciding, no big deal, let's just cut them apart and hide them around the state. But who knows how they died? I live in that world. That's the world you should live into, because being a juror is no different than being a person, unlike maybe what you were told earlier. You're told by the judge, although they figured out a way to say it in about 2 paragraphs, you use your common sense and experience in the roles of everyday life or something along those lines. A bunch of lawyers got together and thought about it for 2 weeks and figured out a way to say use your common sense. Ms. Vera just stood up here and said, what if this was an awful accident? Bart Halderson was shot in the back twice. You do not fall down and shoot yourself in the back twice. Bart Halderson and Krista Halderson had their heads chopped off, had their arms and legs removed. That was an awful accident. Think of for a second. You heard about the bones. You saw those marks on the bones, those attempts. Some of them 3, some of them 10, some of them 5. False starts is what the anthropologists called them. That is someone on their hands and knees, Chandler apparently, which was just saying, I guess we're admitting to that now. They lied and chopped him up and hit him around the state. On his hands and knees, some of them from the front to back, meaning probably could see the face of his mom and his dad as that saw moved back and forth, back and forth. And you just saw the bones, but what's before the bones? The skin, the blood, the muscle, the fat, the smell that they had to produce, the blood of his own parents. An awful accident. We heard, I go days without Googling things. I don't, maybe you do. But I bet you don't Google dismembered body found Wisconsin when you're crying on the local news about your missing parents. I bet you don't Google woman's dismembered body found. I bet you don't do legal research about some other guy who chopped up his family members and threw them in a river. Bet you don't do that. This process is common sense. Ms. Vera talked a lot about the lies. Chandler is a liar, and it seems like we all agree on that now. Lots of people lie. I can agree with Ms. Vera on that. But the question in this case isn't, who would do this? And maybe that's something that's gone through your mind here. Who would do this? Who would go through all this? Who would make up all these lies? Who would take it this far? All these fake people, the burner phone, the nonsense, the calls to his dad, the emails back and forth, the friends and family, the move to Florida. Who would do this? And you're gonna leave this room. 6 of you are gonna go home. 12 of you are gonna go into a room and talk to each other. And you're never gonna have an answer to that question. Because who would do this in the common sense meaning of it? Nobody does something like this. But that's not the role of a jury. You're answering a different question, which is who did this, not who would do this. Because for the life of you, I bet before you got that notice in the mail a couple months ago saying you had to come here, you would say nobody. You would have said nobody. Nobody would shoot their dad in the back twice, kill their mom, lay him on the ground in front of their family fireplace, take scissors and pruning shears, take a hacksaw, take a keyhole saw, and saw off their heads, arms, legs, burn them in the fireplace. Over 100 fragments of human bone found in that fireplace. You'd say no one would do this. But you got your jury summons, and you ended up here, and you found out that someone did do it. Chandler Halderson did it. So those lies are important. Because you at some level have to grasp how this man got to that point. As I said in the opening statement, the murders were just a small piece of the puzzle. None of the things that happened before, none of the things that happened after make any sense. Got to have the murders, to understand why he did that bizarre story for 7 days of his parents going missing with the unknown couple. And you can understand the murders if you understand what happened before with his bizarre actions of building up this life that wasn't real. Why were those lies important? They were important because that's all he had. We're here because of the deaths of Bart and Krista Halderson, and they are dead. There's no doubt about that. You have most decidedly concluded that at this point. You have seen their bodies. But on some level, whoever Chandler Halderson was died years ago as well. And what was left was this shell of a person who made this nonsense up, who built himself up to be a tech employee, rescue scuba diving guy, who's going to college. It was all he had. It was all he had. And that started to unravel. Maybe his parents suspected it. But you listened to Bart Halderson on that call just about a day before he was killed. That sound like someone to you who knew his son had been lying to him? Those text messages. I spoke to Omar Job. I'm ready whenever you are. He didn't know what was going on until that moment. So when Bart Halderson finds out that this is a lie, to Chandler, whoever Chandler Halderson is, the whole world crumbles. Because if you weren't going to school, they sure weren't going to hire you at American Family Insurance. That couldn't have been real. There's no way you got a job at SpaceX. What else are you lying about? Where are you going all the time when you say you're training for this scuba diving team? Everything about him falls apart. He doesn't have any money. Remember when he texted his girlfriend he was going to the police? Hey, can I have $5 for a sandwich? He can't just leave. He can't move out. He can't get in a car and head west. He probably couldn't make it out of the state with the amount of money he had because he never had a job. He had two options. Own up to his lies, stand up, and finally tell the truth for once. Or like a coward, shoot your father in the back. And that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. Miss Vera says, wow, we just got a shell casing. Yeah, we got a bullet fragment. Just happens to have Bart Halderson's DNA on it. And you looked at it, just happens to appear to have blood all over it. And then text my mom. Hey, pick up soda for me. Dad's phone's dead. She gets home. Whose blood spatters on the safe right there by the bullet fragment? Those little red dots, human blood. It's Krista Halderson. We don't know what happened. We know exactly what happened. Murders are not captured on video. That's not how this happens. That's how this works. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, there are some people who are stupid enough to walk up to a gas station, stand in front of the security camera, and shoot somebody. But that's not real life. That's not common sense. Chandler Halderson did this in the basement of his house. The blood is everywhere. The bullet's there. You heard from Mr. Leatherberry, who testified, he only found one, and the one he found was kind of rolled behind under that bench. He tried to clean up. Peroxide everywhere. He's having people bring him peroxide. Blood all over that fireplace stoop. Bone fragments in the ash trap. You know exactly what happened. You don't need a video. The lies are important because it's all Chandler Halderson had. And when they were exposed, he started coming up with this plan. And yeah, after the Omar Job text comes in on the 29th, he's having a conversation with his girlfriend. You heard, Miss Vera actually read it, and that's fair. The day before, hey, are we going to the cabin? What's going on? They're talking about the cabin. He's starting to dabble with the idea of what he's doing. But then I think it was at 1:04 p.m., just about an hour and a half, 2 hours before he did it, he says they're going to the cabin this weekend. He made his final decision. Because at that moment, Chandler Halderson knew there was no way out. He couldn't get in the car and drive away. He couldn't make up another lie. He couldn't make up another email. He couldn't buy another burner phone. It was done. Everyone was going to see him for what he was. Just some liar. Some guy without a job, not going to school, who'd been lying to everyone for years. And he couldn't handle that. So he committed the ultimate act of betrayal against your parents. Perhaps against any human being, but especially your parents, the person who held you when you were a baby and cleaned up your cuts on your knee when you were learning to ride a bike, comforted you when you were crying. The ultimate act of betrayal. He shot his parents. And then he cut them up and he hid them. But the lies didn't even stop there. It was a new lie. No, that's the cabin. Now he's on the news. Now he's giving interviews. Given 2-3 more days, don't think for a second there wouldn't have been 2-3 more fake emails. Text messages from my mom. A whole new world. A whole new reality for Chandler that he got to live in. His checklist was right there. Finally, he was going to get a job. Obviously, mom and dad couldn't support him anymore. Maybe he was going to get some life insurance. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. But he certainly got to continue on his fake life. He got to keep his girlfriend. People continued to respect him. His friends probably continued to think that he was successful, important. The lies were rinsed and repeated, rinsed and repeated. Now I promise I'm about done, and I'm the last person who talks. The judge is going to talk a little bit more. What he's going to say next is hard to hear in that he has to read off the verdict forms you're going to take back to the jury room with you. Verdict forms are the physical documents for each charge. There's a bunch of charges here. For each one, there's one that says guilty and not guilty, guilty and not guilty, guilty and not guilty. And he actually read them all, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but he has to do it. But what Ms. Vera is asking you to do is to lie. It is the last lie of Chandler Halderson. His lawyers stood up here and told you to lie for him. Not to do what you swore to do, which is to render a just and true verdict based on the evidence, to reconcile the evidence, if you can find any reasonable hypothesis consistent with the defendant's innocence, a reasonable hypothesis. That reasonable hypothesis that was just offered to you is that it was an accident. That's how they died. And then Chandler made what his attorney believes to be the reasonable decision to chop apart those bodies and hide them around the state. What you're being asked to do is to lie one last time. It is the experience that everyone in Chandler Halderson's life has had to deal with, and now it's yours. His girlfriend dealt with it. Sure, Bart and Krista dealt with it. Finding out maybe on the last day of their lives. Mitchell is dealing with it. Brett is dealing with it. They're family friends. The Hilgendorfs. Their kids, Haley and Hannah, they've had to deal with it. Mary Sesto had to deal with it. Kevin Linsmeyer, the neighbor, had to deal with it. Then to the police. Deputy Seeley, Deputy Nelson, Deputy Shunk, Deputy Sims, Deputy Hendrickson, Deputy Collins-LaFleur. Everyone who has interacted with this man for years has had no other experience other than being lied to. And now it's you that's going to be lied to by his attorneys. Asking you.
I'm going to object now.
Inside bar. Thanks for your patience, folks. I want to clarify that, of course, within the instructions, as far as closing argument not being evidence, closing argument being opinions expressed by counsel for both the state and the defense to you about their view of the evidence and so forth. My understanding is the state was not meaning to suggest that counsel for the defense had lied or in any way was urging you to do anything other than uphold your oath and to follow the law as instructed in your deliberations. If you could continue.
Thank you. Those verdict forms you're going to fill out, every single one of them represents something that happened here. And what we're asking you to do is to dig through that evidence, dig through your notes, dig through your memory of what happened. What happened here wasn't an accident. What happened here wasn't a mistake. What happened here wasn't innocence, lies, coincidences. Mr. Halderson's statement to the police that my mom has nosebleeds and my dad, he just scratches his psoriasis. It doesn't explain his blood on a bullet fragment. It doesn't explain all of their blood on the fireplace. It doesn't explain the Haldersons' teeth in the ash trap. It doesn't explain their skull in the ash trap and placed on top of the fireplace. What I'm asking you to do is to look for the truth and not to negotiate. Not take the idea that, well, there's one piece of paper there where he signed a document and says he lied to the cops, and maybe that's good enough. These people were killed. This is a first-degree intentional homicide. This is a first-degree intentional homicide. You cannot shoot someone in the back. You cannot chop them up. You cannot scatter their remains and come to any other conclusion. And there is only one person who did those things here, and that is Chandler Halderson. And we're asking you to find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. As counsel indicated, I have a little bit more to instruct you, and I do need to review with you the verdict forms. When I'm finished with this, we will draw the 5 names of those individuals who will not be participating in the deliberations. Now, members of the jury, the duties of counsel and the court have been performed. The case has been argued by counsel. The court has instructed you regarding the rules of law which should govern you in your deliberations. The time has come when the great burden of reaching a just, fair, and conscientious decision of this case is to be thrown wholly upon you, the jurors selected for this important duty. You will not be swayed by sympathy, prejudice, or passion. You will be very careful and deliberate in weighing the evidence. I charge you to keep your duty steadfastly in mind and as upright citizens to render a just and true verdict on all counts. You are to decide only whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the offenses charged. Any consequences of your verdicts are matters for the court alone to decide and must not affect your deliberations. You will be provided with 16 verdict forms. There are 2 forms for each count, and the count to which they apply is identified on each verdict form at the top. So I'll show you each of these. As to count 1, there are 2 verdict forms. One reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Bart Halderson, as charged in count 1 of the amended information." The second verdict form for count 1 reads almost identically, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Bart Halderson, as charged in count 1 of the amended information." There is a space for the date of the verdict. There is a space for a signature of the presiding juror. As to each of these 8 counts, only one verdict form should be returned. The other verdict form should be left blank. The presiding juror only should sign and date the verdict that represents the verdict of the jury as to that count. For count 2, one verdict form reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 2 of the amended information." The corresponding verdict form for count 2 reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 2 of the amended information." The 2 verdict forms for count 3 One reading, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson as charged in count 3 of the amended information. And the second reading, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson as charged in count 3 of the amended information with date and signature lines on both. As to count 4, the 2 verdict forms read, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of hiding a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson as charged in count 4 of the amended information. And the second, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson as charged in count 4 of the information with a date and signature space on both verdict forms. As to count 5, which is identified again on the verdict forms, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 5 of the amended information, and we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 5 of the amended information with signature and date lines for both. Count 6, as identified on the verdict forms, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 6 of the amended information, and the corresponding form, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 6 of the amended information, with again date and signature spaces on both forms. As to verdict count 7, as identified on the forms, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 7 of the amended information. And we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson as charged in count 7 of the amended information, again with the signature spaces and dates on each. And finally, the 2 verdict forms as to count 8, as identified on each. We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson not guilty of hiding a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 8 of the amended information. And the second, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 8 of the amended information. Both of those, again, with a space for the date and the signature of the presiding juror. It is for you to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of each of the offenses charged. You must make a finding as to each count of the amended information. Each count charges a separate crime, and you must consider each one separately. Your verdict for the crime charged in one count must not affect your verdict on any other count. This is a criminal, not a civil case. Therefore, before a jury may return verdicts which may legally be received, the verdicts must be reached unanimously. In a criminal case, all 12 jurors must agree in order to arrive at a verdict. When you retire to the jury room, select one of your members to preside over your deliberations. The presiding juror's vote is entitled to no greater weight than the vote of any other juror. If you need to communicate with the court while you are deliberating, send a note through the bailiff signed by the presiding juror. To have a complete record of this trial, it is important that you communicate with the court only by a written note. If you have questions, the court will talk with the attorneys before answering, so it may take some time. You should continue deliberations while you wait for an answer. The court will answer any questions in writing or orally back here in open court. When you have agreed upon your verdicts, have each one signed and dated by the person you've selected to preside. After you've reached verdicts on all 8 counts, the presiding juror should notify the bailiff that the verdicts have been reached. We will assemble everyone back into the courtroom, and the jury will enter the courtroom. The verdict forms, as well as my instructions will be within this folder, and obviously the presiding juror should carry the folder into the courtroom when you return to the courtroom. That will clue me into which one of you has been selected as the presiding juror. I will then, once we've assembled and gone back on the record, ask the presiding juror if the jury has indeed reached verdicts on all 8 counts. Assuming the answer is yes, I will ask the presiding juror to give the folder to Randy, and he will provide it to me. Unlike on TV or sometimes on movies, jurors or the presiding juror does not read the verdicts. I take care of that. However, after the verdicts have been read, I will ask each juror individually if those were the verdicts that they agreed upon reaching. In that way, we will have knowledge of the unanimous agreement of everyone. At that point, then, the jury will be able to be discharged. We have 2 things we have to do yet, and one of those is, for me, the most bittersweet moment in any trial, because 5 of you have devoted 10 days, at least, to this process, not to mention the days when we were not here, and I'm sure it was still a controlling factor in your lives, because you told me it was. I wish we didn't have to have alternates, and I didn't know how many to select. I, as it turns out, had more than we needed, but who knew that when we started on January 3rd? And so for those of you that we're about to name as the alternates who won't be deliberating, you were as valuable as the 12 who make the decision here, and I want you to know that and to understand that we appreciate your time and your efforts here just as much. I'm going to hold the basket, and Lindsay will draw 5 slips of paper, and then I'll identify who it is that have been chosen.
Do you swear that you will, to the utmost of your ability, keep all jurors sworn in this trial together in some private and convenient place, subject to the direction of the court, until they have reached an agreed verdict or discharged by the court, and that you will not, before they render their verdict, communicate to any person the state of their deliberations from the verdict they have agreed upon?
I will.
Thank you, sir.
All rise for the jury.